It obviously carried little weight in terms of politics or commerce. Samuel Eliot Morison, Perry Miller's colleague at Harvard, admired the Pilgrims and edited a popular edition of Bradford's history, but he conceded Plymouth's insignificance. By any quantitative standard, he wrote, Plymouth was one of the smallest, weakest, and least important of the English colonies. For the most part, therefore, historians set Plymouth aside once John Winthrop and his Puritan flotilla reached Massachusetts Bay. Boston is the city on a hill, Plymouth a moribund backwater. Besides their place within American mythology and genealogy, then, do the Pilgrims and their colony matter? The Mayflower passengers and the other English settlers of Plymouth Colony had genuine accomplishments. The separatists among the Mayflower passengers transplanted a church in which laymen elected their officers and exercised discipline over each other. When they formed a government and made laws, Pilgrim leaders could not envision, and would not have favored, democracy as later Americans would understand it. Nevertheless, they established a political framework with a significant degree of participation, and one that endured for nearly 70 years. Plymouth Colony also matters in a very different respect. A few months after their 1620 landing, the Pilgrims established a mutual defense treaty with Massasoit. While this alliance initially benefited both English settlers and Wampanoags, the Pilgrims took steps to establish themselves as the foremost military power in the region. By the time of Massasoit's 1660 death, Plymouth's magistrates treated and mistreated the Wampanoags as their subjects. Settlers acquired Wampanoag land through purchase, pressure, and swindle. Eventually, sachems in the western portion of New Plymouth chose armed resistance over further dispossession and humiliation. The resulting King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678, shattered native and English communities across New England. Still, the merit of unearthing and narrating New Plymouth's history does not hinge only on the colony's grand significance or lack thereof. Rather, They Knew They Were Pilgrims uses Plymouth Colony as a fresh lens for examining the contested meaning of liberty in early New England. The English settlers who came to New Plymouth over the span of its 7-decade history shared a fierce commitment to liberty, but they understood it in a variety of often contradictory ways. Prominent among these meanings were the many varieties of Christian liberty articulated by the colony's Protestant Christians. The majority of the Pilgrims were separatists, men and women who had entirely rejected the Church of England. They did so to reclaim what they understood as the liberty of the gospel, their freedom to form their own churches and choose their own officers. These Pilgrim separatists embarked for North America because they wanted to preserve their liberty to worship God in accordance with their understanding of the Bible. They knew they were pilgrims, wrote William Bradford. Even before John Bunyan further popularized the motif through The Pilgrim's Progress, many English Protestants understood their lives as spiritual pilgrimages, beset with temptations and afflictions, but with the promise of eventual glory. Plymouth Colony settlers disagreed among themselves, however, about the prescribed earthly course for this pilgrimage, in particular about what constituted the pure worship of God. Many settlers also favored liberty of conscience, but this was another slippery phrase. Liberty of conscience sometimes simply meant that religious dissenters could opt out of established forms of worship, but it also could imply a fuller toleration of religious pluralism. Throughout most of Plymouth Colony's 70-year history, magistrates did not force individuals to attend worship, join churches, or have their children baptized. In these significant respects, settlers enjoyed a certain amount of liberty of conscience. At the same time, dissenters did not possess the freedom to air their opinions or gather with like-minded men and women for their own religious exercises. Also, once Plymouth's government mandated that towns tax inhabitants to build congregational churches and pay congregational ministers, it did not exempt dissenters from these obligations. Quakers and some Baptists contended for a more complete religious toleration. They eventually gained the liberty to worship according to their own principles, but their struggle against church taxes continued long after New Plymouth's demise. Some of the Pilgrims suffered persecution for their religious beliefs and practices in England. Once in charge of their own colony, however, they persecuted others. Plymouth's leaders banished a number of dissenters, and they whipped, imprisoned, and fined